Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Joseph Edelin, and welcome to Decolonizing the Curriculum, ways for you to infuse the history and culture of your students in your classroom. I am the Executive Director of Project Ujima, a educational consulting firm that specializes in culturally responsive teaching, anti-racism, and African-centered education. I do work with schools, with districts, with teachers, one-on-one coaching, so that we can find better ways and more effective ways to include the history and culture of our students into the classroom and into their normal classroom experience. Today, we're going to be talking about ways that you can decolonize your curriculum. Take the curriculum that's in front of you and mold it and shift it, break it down and rebuild it to meet the needs of your students, and to get rid of all notions, or as many notions as possible, of white supremacy and oppression that exists in the curriculum on a regular basis. Just to get you to know a little bit about me before we get started, just for those who are not familiar with me and my work, I am Joseph Edelin. I was born and raised in Brookline, Massachusetts. If you know anything about New Kids on the Block or the Kennedys, you're welcome. That's us at Brookline. I went to Morehouse College straight out of high school, and I got my bachelor's degree in history, had a minor in African American studies, and then I got my master's in education from University of St. Thomas at Houston. After leaving Houston I did Teach for America, 2002, and between Houston and Atlanta, I taught 6th and 7th grade social studies for 19 years. I was high school assistant principal in Atlanta, and since then, since leaving the classroom, I've been an educational consultant. I have written a few books that you hear about later, and I am a professional speaker. And I speak on topics having to do with culturally responsive teaching, African-centered education, decolonizing, talking about race and racism with students, all of those things. So that's a little bit about me, just so you know who's up here talking to you today. Our objective, because as teachers, we have to have objectives to let everybody know what's coming down the pipeline. Hopefully after today's presentation, you will be able to explore the overt and covert ways that school curricula spread notions of bias, racism, and white supremacy to students, and the effect that it has on student self-concept and self-esteem. You will also be able to explore strategies for decolonizing the content of your curriculum. I'm hoping that we can get to all of that today, and that if you have any questions at the end of this presentation, all my contact information will be there. To kind of break down our agenda for today, we've done our introductions. We'll be defining colonization in just a moment. We're looking at colonization in the curriculum and what that looks like, and both the overt and covert ways that occurs. We're going to be looking at a video called A Girl Like Me, and you'll see the effects of a colonized curriculum on students and on children of color, specifically Black children. And then we'll be looking at steps to decolonizing the curriculum, and then we'll close out. I always like to start this presentation off with this clip. Some years ago, I was sitting at home watching the History Channel, as I often do, and this advertisement came on the History Channel for a news show that they were doing called Expedition Africa. And I was intrigued because, if it has to do with Africa, it sounds like something that I might be interested in. But as I watched this video clip, this promotion, some things stood out to me. So as you're watching this video clip, I want to invite you to look for images and listen for words that describe Africa or African people, right? So images and words that describe Africa or African people as you watch this clip.
This fall on History.
There's something about exploring Africa. Death is a possibility.
4 modern-day explorers.
It's a complete journey of exploration, exactly how it happened 130 years ago.
Retrace the most famous search in history.
Stanley's search for Livingstone is the Super Bowl of all expeditions.
Through 970 miles.
Our journey will take us through some of the most hostile environments in the whole of Africa.
Of hell.
we modern day explorers as tough as the original explorers? We're carrying no GPSs, we're carrying no satellite phones.
We're off direction already.
This is wild Africa. Animals are roaming, dangerous animals.
You are committed. No one's going to come and rescue you.
The cold, the shivers, and the mud, and the wet feet, and the blisters, and the bug bites. It's really uncomfortable. In fact, it's almost deadly now. Kevin? What you don't see are the bugs and diseases. Those are the ones that'll get you almost all the time.
You find yourself no longer trekking, but suddenly surviving.
We're letting a lot of things fall by the wayside, and it could cost us our own survival.
Steven, I will never not push on an expedition.
Oh, man.
Give me that med kit quick, guys.
Astonishing dangerous. You've got to go at the pace of the weakest member of your team.
Right now, we do have problems. One member has bleeding feet, another member has pneumonia. My biggest concern is that we fall apart as a team. Navigating by democracy is getting really hard.
Do we have what it takes to survive?
Our canteens are empty.
We'll find out.
How serious is it?
The same thing can happen to any of us here.
Man, there's a chance none of us will make it.
Expedition Africa, the new series this fall on History Television.
Okay, all right. So if you were paying close attention, you may have heard and seen several things. You may have heard words like hell and death and wild Africa and we might not survive and disease, all of these words that were being brought up as they were talking about this expedition, being modern day explorers. And even that in and of itself, this idea of exploring a place that, is already populated by thousands and millions of people. And then also and visually, what do you see? You see bugs, you see wild animals, you see mud and rain, and you see open sores, and you see all this terrain and all of this geography, and it creates an image in your mind of what Africa is like, what it would be like to go to Africa, right? It doesn't seem like it's going to be an exciting thing to do that's going to be safe. It's not going to be uplifting. It's going to be scary. Where are the people? Right, you have all these animals, but where are the people? You saw maybe a half a second of an image of an African person, and they just happen to have a spear in their hand, right? Playing into these stereotypes that already exist about who African people are and what Africa is like. It's wild, it's untamed, it's savage, right? Where are the buildings? Where are the cities? Where are the people? So all of these things makes you, brings up in your mind what Africa is like. Now think about that for a second, and think about that, what that must be like as an African-American child. And I focus on this term African-American, you have Africa in that name. What it would be like for a child to see this. Would they want to be associated with Africa? Would they want to go to Africa? Would they want to know anything more about Africa? Probably not, because it seems like a dangerous, scary place, right? Now, this, of course, is an advertisement on TV, but think about this in terms of school. Think about this in terms of the context of school, and what images and what words and what content are we exposing to Black children, and all children, but specifically we're talking about Black children today, about what their history looks like, what it sounds like, and what other people's history looks like and sounds like, and you put those things in contrast with each other. Are they being shown positive examples of their history, or is it negative? Are they being shown a balanced depiction of what history looks like and who contributed what and who's done what, or is it unbalanced? Is it making them think that one group of people's history is better than the other? And so this is what happened in schools for 10 hours a day. So imagine being exposed to this kind of negative imagery about your history, negative telling about your history, or lack of being told about your history for 10 hours a day, every day, over the course of 12 years. That's what happens to our students on a regular basis in this country. And so we're going to be looking at how can we undo that today? How can we get rid of that? All right. So when we think about this, we have to think about this idea of colonization. And first off and foremost, like, what does it mean to colonize someone? Like, what does it truly mean? If we're looking at a definition, a good working definition of colonization, to colonize someone, is to conquer a group of people for the express control of their political, economic, and social outcomes. Express control of their political, economic, and social outcomes. But we know that this definition is not a complete definition. We know it leaves out a huge part of what happens during colonization, and that's the effect on the colonized people. Yes, this is giving you perspective from the colonizer. You control someone's political, economic, and social outcomes, but it doesn't talk to you about what happens to the colonized. And we need to dig a little bit deeper in terms of what colonization actually looks like. This is an excerpt from Colonization and Identity by Chris Courtright. And Chris says, in an attempt to, this is a deeper definition of what we talk about when we talk about colonization and what happens to colonized people. It says, in an attempt to control, reap economic benefits, and civilize the indigenous peoples, the colonialists dismantle the native cultures by imposing their own. There is a destruction of the cultural values and way of life. Languages, dress, techniques are defined and constructed through the ideology and values of the colonialists. I underline there is a destruction of cultural values and ways of life, because you have to dismantle what people think or what people do and what their cultural values are, if they're going to think that your culture is better, right? If you want them to think that your culture is superior, if you want them to think that your culture is better than theirs, then you have to first strip away their own culture and their ways of life and make them think that that is inferior, or make them forget that it exists entirely. And so, Carter G. Woodson says it best in Miseducation of the Negro. He says, if you can control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his action. When you determine what a man shall think, you do not have to concern yourself about what he will do. If you make a man feel that he is inferior, you do not have to compel him to accept an inferior status, for he will seek it himself. If you make a man think that he is justly an outcast, you do not have to order him to the back door. He will go without being told. And if there is no back door, his very nature will demand one. When we talk about the effects of slavery and colonization, physical chains can only keep people held down for so long. Eventually, they will fight against their physical chains because it's something that they can see. It's a physical manifestation of their bondage and their oppression. But if you colonize someone's mind, if you have chains around their mind and the way they think, that's a lot harder to get rid of. If you can control the way somebody thinks, then you can control their actions. And this is what Carter G. Woodson was talking about. This is what was stated earlier in that previous quote, about how you can control someone through colonization. And this is what happens to our children, our Black children, every single day in classrooms, where you are teaching them about their history or lack thereof and someone else's history, and how it sits in this hierarchy of social Darwinism, right? And so the way this is done in schools is through omission and distortion. This is how you control someone's thinking. This is what's done in schools. And this is the cornerstone of white supremacy, honestly, in education today. They do this in curricula through omission and distortion. I'll give you some examples. Many of us grew up hearing about the classics, talking about English class, right? The classics, or even music, classical music, right? If you look at the definition of what it means to be a classic, to be classical, it means to be the best of the best, or at the high point of civilization, right? But let's explore what the classics were, right? Titles like Moby Dick and the Scarlet Letter and Adventures of Huck Finn, okay? Little Women, and those sorts of things. And so if you are mentioning the classics and the only titles that you are exposing children to are that of white men and white women, then by omission, you are saying that there are no classics by African or African American writers. They just don't exist, right? where are the African classics? Where's the African literature? Where's African American literature? Where does that exist? And so by omission, you are making students think that they don't exist, and that their history, their people have not contributed to this beautiful work of literature that you're studying in school, that there are no African American classics, okay? This is by omission. This has an effect on students thinking about themselves and their own people. Let's talk about the founding fathers for a second. This word founding fathers has a very interesting ring to it. It sounds so positive. It sounds so benevolent. But if you look at the founding fathers, if you look at this group of white men, 6 out of the 7 pictured here owned African people as enslaved people. That's not talked about. That's not benevolent. That's not nice, right? And the fact that they had power, like what actually gave them power to be able to be at these tables and create these documents like the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, to be able to mold this country into the vision that they saw for it. In order to be able to get into places of power like that, you have to have money. Well, how did these people amass their fortunes? Through the profits that they were receiving because of the blood, sweat, and tears of their enslaved African American people that were working for them, amassing them huge amounts of money. And that's how they got into power, right? You have to think about this, but by omission, if you leave that out, it makes it seem like, oh, these white men were doing such great things and they were building this country and we should be thankful and all this, but you're leaving out whole parts of the history and the effect that might have on a child's perception of other people in relation to themselves can be devastating. This is also true of ancient Greece. Ancient Greece, we hear about from the time that we are able to understand stories, right? You hear these amazing stories of Greek mythology, right? Hercules and Zeus and all of these, right? And you hear about, and when you get older, you hear about the things that the ancient Greeks were able to accomplish, right? The Colosseum and the Parthenon, and then they have all these great thinkers, Aristotle and Socrates and all of these folks. And the way they're presented, the artwork, right? But again, through omission and distortion, it's not mentioned that Greek civilization came to be because the ancient Greeks came into Africa and took over Egypt, which is in Africa. And at the time, Egypt, ancient Egypt, was the pinnacle of civilization anywhere in the world. And so when the Greeks came and through force of war, came and took over Egypt, they literally adopted the culture. They adopted what was happening and brought it back to Greece. If you look at the ancient Greek gods, Zeus and Hades and Apollo and all of them, right? Those are just transcriptions from ancient Egyptian gods. You talk about philosophy and all of these great philosophers. They learned that from the ancient Egyptian scholars. All the buildings, columns were invented in ancient Egypt, but the ancient Greeks are given credit for it. So again, through omission and distortion, you are controlling the information that a child can receive, and therefore controlling not only what they receive, but how they perceive it. Same thing with slavery. When we talk about the history of African American people, and as a teacher, your first inclination is to start that history in slavery, you, by definition, are omitting literally hundreds of thousands of years of African history, starting with the very first human being on Earth, started in Africa, right? That's where our history starts. And then you have all the myriad of civilizations that sprung up in Africa and influenced world events and world history and all of the different inventions and contributions that we've been able to make. But if you start in slavery, then you start a people's history in degradation, in blood, in sweat, and murder, and whips, and chains. And imagine what that makes a child who's seeing that and hearing that feel like. And then the next thing they learn is about ancient Greek culture and how amazing these Europeans were and all the things that they created. What did I create? What did I do besides pick cotton and tobacco and indigo and rice and get whipped and beaten and sold away from my family? Think about what it makes someone feel about where they come from. This is what happens. This is what happens in schools every single day. And this is through that omission and distortion, which is the cornerstone of white supremacy and how classrooms are colonized on a regular basis. And these are just a couple of examples. But what's the short and long-term effect on students who are exposed to a colonized curriculum? Like if you're hearing this starting in kindergarten, pre-K, and you get all of that up through your 12th grade year, like what happens to a child who hears that? Going to show you a clip from a documentary called A Girl Like Me. And this documentary was done by a young high school student from New York a few years ago, a young sister. And she wanted to recreate the doll test done by Dr. Kenneth Clark in the 1950s, which was the cornerstone of the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court case. Dr. Clark's research helped bolster what was being said about the nature of what was happening in schools. And in it, she explains it in the video, but Dr. Clark did this thing called the doll test, where he had children sit down and had to choose a black doll or a white doll based upon certain questions that they were being asked. And so the sister who created this documentary, A Girl Like Me, wanted to see if things have changed in the last 50, 60 years since Brown versus Board of Education, and what has been happening in education since then, and have things changed. So look at this and see the effects of a colonized curriculum.
In Brown versus Board of Education, the famous case that desegregated schools in the 1950s, Dr. Kenneth Clark conducted a doll test with black children. He asked them to choose between a black doll and a white doll. In most instances, the majority of the children preferred the white doll. I decided to reconduct this test as Dr. Clark did to see how we've progressed since then. Can you show me the doll that you like best or that you'd like to play with?
This one. I like that one. Okay. This one.
That one?
This one. I like to play with this.
And can you show me the doll that is the nice doll? And why is that the nice doll?
She's white.
And can you show me the doll that looks bad? Okay. And and why does that look bad?
Because it's black.
And why do you think that's a nice doll?
Because she's white.
And can you give me the doll that looks like you? "15 out of the 21 children preferred the white doll."
So we see, and all those children in that video are under the age of 5. So we see at such an early age that there's already been an internalization of inferiority and superiority based on race. And this does not happen by accident. Children are not born this way. They have to be taught that. And it happens oftentimes in society, through the media, but also in schools. And so by the age of 5, children are already associating themselves with inferiority and white people with superiority. They're taught to hate themselves and love other people. They're taught to deny themselves and identify with somebody else, okay? This is the effect of a colonized curriculum. And think about what happens on the long term. If you go through 12 years of schooling from kindergarten to 12th grade, and you go 12 years of receiving that, what does that do to you when you leave the school? What are you trying to aspire to be? What do you think about your people? What do you think about other people, right? It affects your self-concept. It affects your self-esteem, how you think about your hair, your skin color, your nose, your lips. and how you think about other people's standards of beauty and what you think is possible for yourself based on what you've been taught and what you associate with being Black. This is the effect of a colonized curriculum. And what we need to do is we need to figure out ways to, at the earliest levels, decolonize our curriculums. So when we talk about decolonization, we have to first understand what that means, okay? We have to understand what that means. And there are a couple of quotes I want to bring to the forefront here. The first one is from Jananai Balasubramanian. And what's said here is, in terms of decolonization, is that what I hope to have expressed to you is that decolonization is a way of life, a path forward that connects us to our past, present, and future. It is personal, political, spiritual, and intentional. If the most I have done is introduce you to questions about what decolonization means to you in your own life, wherever you might be reading this from, then I have done well. From here, the conversations, the actions, the seeking, and building of community, these things are up to you. Decolonization has a lot more to do than with just a curriculum. It has to start with self. As an educator, as a teacher, you have to think about all the ways that you have been colonized, your mind has been colonized, the way you think has been colonized, and it has to start with that personal work. Before you can jump into the curriculum and start, erasing things and adding things and getting all you have to first do that personal self-work, and then you can start working on the exterior, right? So it's a way of life. It's how you move and operate. Another quote from Len Pierre: I personally define decolonization as the deconstruction, dismantling, and disrupting of cultural barriers that separate us, suppress us, and often oppress us. Often these barriers manifest into power imbalances in the institutions we work for, cognitive imperialism, viewing one method or knowledge system as superior to others, corporate work structures, and efficiency in capitalistic methodologies. So again, this is part of a system. This is, once you get done with that self-work, then you got to start looking at the system. It's more than just words on a paper that you have to teach someone. It's also about how they are taught, how the different systems and different procedures and routines that are existing in your classroom and in your school. So it's more than just decolonizing what you put in front of students. It's also about how you interact with students, the words you use, how you interact with other people, what power structures exist in schools, who's being referred to special education, who has the largest discipline referrals, who's being expelled and suspended the most. We have to think about those things, because all of that is a part of colonization, right? What ways are we asking students to show up? Or is there a uniform? Where does that cultural uniform come from? Where does the idea of a uniform come from? Are students expected to walk in lines and so on and so forth, and be silent and raise their hand? Culturally, where does that come from? These are things we have to think about and deconstruct and then decolonize. And there are some concrete steps you can take in your classroom. There are some concrete steps that you can start doing tomorrow if you needed to decolonize your classroom. And I've outlined them in 4 steps here. The first is, you can't teach what you don't know. You need to educate yourself on the history and culture of your students. If all you know is what you were taught in school, and if you're like any of the rest of us, you probably grew up on a colonized curriculum. And so the works and the history you were exposed to was from a colonized perspective. So you have to do your research. You have to read. You have to interrogate things. You have to just get there and figure out who your students are, and then what is their history, right? What is their history? Where does it come from? And doesn't matter if you're from the same background and culture the students you teach. Because if you were taught in a colonized way, probably you had you only know a colonized education, unless you've done some deeper digging in college or other places. Once you know this history, then you need to incorporate that history and culture of your students into your lessons, right? That's the next step. Once you've learned, now you have to incorporate. Other things you can do is you can decorate your classroom to reflect the history and cultures of your students, right? How they see themselves and what they see around them impacts their self-concept, impacts how they feel about themselves and their people. And then lastly, listen to and center the voices of the students in your classroom. Listen to your students and center their voices in your classroom. That is a way to decolonize the systems and structures that we have in our classrooms. This idea of the sage on the stage, the teacher is always right. The teacher is the one leading the lesson. The teacher is the one. You got to decolonize that. You got to get rid of that mindset that only the teacher has the wisdom to be able to contribute and mold the classroom. You got to figure out what the students want, what their needs are, what they're looking for to make their education a positive one, their educational experience a positive one. So we're going to go step by step and just look at a few of these. So when we're talking about educating yourself on the history and culture of your students, you got to know where to look. You have to look at some of these. You have to read. You have to do some research. You got to get online. You got to go to your library. And I've outlined some books here, some really, really great ones. I'm going to highlight two that I think are super helpful for students. For teachers and for students, especially when you're trying to educate yourself and educate your students. Your Black students or any students that you teach, but Black students in particular, in ways to make it concrete in the classroom. See, it's one thing to read these hefty, very, very wordy, very deep, very dense books, but then how does that translate into the classroom? The two books I want to focus on are these two right here, Through Our Own Eyes, A Journey into African American History, and the second one in purple is Through Our Own Eyes, A Celebration of Black Women in History. These are both books that I wrote because I was trying to find ways to help teachers incorporate the accomplishments and contributions of African and African American people into their classrooms in a very tangible, easy, plug and play way. All right. And so that's what I did there. So we're going to explore both of those really quickly. The first book that I wrote is called Through Our Own Eyes, A Journey into African American History. And this is a complete chronology of African American history, starting in the earliest times in Africa and moving all the way up through the end of the civil rights movement with the Black Panthers. And so everything you can think of that happened in between there is most likely going to be contained in this book. In this book, so there are 30 different texts about different men, women, groups, and civilizations from African and African American history. 30 different texts, okay? Connected with each one of those texts, there are 150 learning activities to gauge student understanding. So students are reading, and then there are activities to make sure they understood what they wrote, right? Worksheets that are in there. Worksheets that you can use in the classroom to help your students understand what they just read. So as you're reading, as you as the educator are reading and gaining this knowledge, you can then turnkey that for your students. Also, with every single reading, I have embedded a QR code. It's scannable. You can take your smartphone, scan it, or the students can take their smartphone and scan it, and a video will come up that is associated with the text. So now they're reading, but now they're getting the visual. Many of our students are visual learners. And so how can we incorporate the visual into this as well? So I am embedded videos that go with every topic in this, that are associated in this book. And then in addition to that, because I know many of our kids are kinesthetic, I also added 180 hands-on projects to deepen their learning, higher Bloom's level taxonomy to deepen their learning. All that is contained within this book that you, of course, can find on my website, projectujima.com, or on Amazon. This is existing on Amazon. You can get it. And this has been used by schools across the country and has gotten great reviews. So that's the first one. The second one I wrote, it's called Through Our Own Eyes, A Celebration of Black Women in History. I found that if African and African American history is absent in the curriculum, then the history of Black women is even more absent. And that's a travesty, and that should not be, because Black women have had such an amazing contribution on the history of not just this country, but on the world. And so in this book, you'll find short biographies of 49 different Black women from the areas of African history, STEM, civil rights, politics, business, sports and entertainment, and the arts, right? So 49 different women spanning those categories. There are 250 learning activities to gauge student understanding, right? And again, there's the embedded scannable QR codes that you can that they can access to give them the visual along with the text. So there are videos that go with each one of the women highlighted in this book. And then there are over 195 hands-on projects to deepen their student learning in this that are in this book. So that you're getting the reading, so you're doing the literacy, you're getting the check for understandings, you're getting the videos, and you're getting the hands-on projects. And again, this is also on my website, projectujima.com, as well as on Amazon. And so if you're looking to find ways to educate yourself and educate your students simultaneously, I think these might be some good places to start. And when you learn about the history of African and African American people, you can find you find all these things that you didn't know and ways to incorporate them. And these are some steps to decolonize the different content areas. We'll start with social studies, since that tends to be the easiest one. When you're talking about decolonizing social studies, we have to start, of course, with this notion of Egypt. The original name for Egypt was Kemet. Kemet literally means land of the Black people, or land of the Blacks. The word Egypt comes from ancient Greek. When they took over, they changed the name. It was actually Aegyptos, and then that literally means land of the burnt skin faces. Okay, and so the original name was Kemet. The ancient Greeks came and changed the name, and then when it became anglicized, it became Egypt. So Aegyptos became Egypt. We have to know that the original people from Kemet were dark-skinned African people, not what you see in movies. Not what you see in movies with these light-skinned folks who look like they might have a tan, or these Europeans. Gods of Egypt came out a few years ago. This is not what the ancient Egyptians looked like. This is not who built the pyramids. This is not who created writing. This is not who created math. The people who did that were Black people, not what the media portrays. And so when you learn about this, you can incorporate this into your curriculum. Okay. We have to reiterate again that Egypt is in Africa. If you look at many textbooks across the country, they associate Egypt with the Middle East, literally removing it from Africa. We have to change that narrative and that distortion and correct it. Remember, right? Omission and distortion. They are distorting our history by making it seem that Egypt is not in Africa. Another thing, another topic to talk about is Mansa Musa, right? One of the most unknown characters from our history. Mansa Musa, of course, was a king from ancient Mali, a ruler from ancient Mali in West Africa. And he had so much gold, he's reported to be the richest man to ever live in history, right? His wealth, his accumulated wealth is valued right now at $400 billion. $400 billion. The richest man in history was a Black man. And we need to incorporate this into the history, into our curriculum, into our lessons, because this so often Black people are associated with poverty, associated with being poor, associated with not having things, associated with not being civilized. And this man was in charge of one of the largest civilizations in the history of the world, and the richest, right? So when people talk about Bezos and Musk and Gates and all that, they got nothing on Mansa Musa, right? Imagine what that would do for a Black child, seeing that Black face and knowing the riches that were associated with it. And then, of course, if we're talking about other cultures, we need to also, talk about Latin American culture, we need to mention the Olmecs, right? The Olmecs were a civilization that existed in Mexico several thousand years ago. What we know about the Olmecs, though, is that the Olmec civilization actually started as a result, from the contributions of Africans who sailed from Africa and landed in Mexico some 1,200 years before Columbus ever even was born, right? And we even look at these Olmec heads that exist in places in Mexico, and you see it. They have African features: lips, nose, right? They have some are depicted with cornrows in their hair. Huge stones built out of built to resemble the people who came from over the seas, and we have to understand that because they brought civilization with them. And so the Olmecs contributed to the establishment of the Mayan civilization and the Aztec civilization. So we need to talk about the impact that African people have had on other civilizations as well. Imagine what this could do, this inclusion, not this omission, this inclusion of the accomplishments of African people on global civilizations, and what it could do for Black and Brown relationships, knowing that we have helped out each other in the past, right? That we do not need to be at odds with each other. And all of these things, when you're talking about, this information, you got to read, and you can find this kind of information. They came before Columbus, The African Presence in Ancient America, Introduction to African Civilization by John G. Jackson, or The African Origins of Civilization, Myth or Reality by Sheikh Anta Diop. These are books that you can read to give you more information on the African civilizations and the contributions and accomplishments in history. When we talk about decolonizing ELA, so that was social studies. When we talk about decolonizing an ELA curriculum, we have to choose works that establish a positive racial identity for our students. So we have to get rid of this notion, not get rid of completely, but get rid of this notion of just teaching the classics. We need to teach books that where the characters look like our children, look like our students, and contribute to a positive racial identity, right? So we're not talking about books that always show Black folks, doing drugs or being involved in crime or so on and so forth, but that have a positive depiction of who we are as a people. So these are just a few. The Skin I'm In, Malcolm X, A Treasure Within. It's a beautiful book. The Stars Beneath Our Feet, and Hair Love, obviously. We need to choose books and activities that develop a positive racial identity in our kids. When we talk about math, people always talk, I don't know how to make my curriculum more culturally responsive. I don't know how to decolonize my math curriculum. It's just math, it's just numbers. It's incorrect. There are tons of ways you can do it. And we'll start with this. We all know this when we took 10th or 11th grade math, we had to learn this formula, right? A squared plus B squared equals C squared. That's called the Pythagorean theorem with a 3, 4, 5 triangle. The Pythagorean theorem. We learned it. Everyone did. Have you used it? That's none of my business, right? But this is what it is. And this is from this guy Pythagoras, this Greek guy who came up with this theorem about how to find the measurements of the different sides of a right triangle, right? Pythagoras, Greek guy. What is not taught in math class, because we all learn this guy, we all learn this theorem, is that Pythagoras spent 33 years in ancient Egypt learning, going to school, right? Going to school, learning and studying papyrus, which is Egyptian paper, called the Alms Papyrus, where clearly there are depictions of a right triangle. And he derived his formula after studying in ancient Egypt for 33 years. And so imagine, if this is omission, right? This is leaving out part of the history. But if you included it, you would know that maybe this shouldn't be called Pythagorean theorem. Maybe it should be called somebody else's theorem, right? Somebody from Africa, or just mentioning that African people were responsible for this man's education, so where he can create this theory, right? This, of course, needs to be included. Again, we talk about science. We talk about science. We got, the father of medicine, right? Hippocrates. Every doctor anywhere has to take the Hippocratic Oath. Comes from this man, Hippocrates. He's called the father of medicine. But what do we know about the father of medicine? We know that the father of medicine studied the works of this Black man named Imhotep, who was from where? Ancient Egypt, who existed some 3,000 years before Hippocrates did, okay? He existed thousands of years. So this man is studying Imhotep. He was the world's first multi-genius. He designed the first step pyramid. He cured over 200 diseases in ancient Egypt. He performed brain surgery, right? He wrote tons and tons of different texts. We know this, and we know Hippocrates studied his work. So how is Hippocrates the father of medicine? How is it the Hippocratic Oath? It should be the Imhotepic Oath or something like that, right? Our students, our children need to see themselves in every content area, not just social studies, because we have had an impact. Our history has impacted all areas of civilization, not just history. So we have to include that. And there are tons of books you can read to help with that. Stolen Legacy by George G.M. James is one of them, okay? Another thing I talked about is this notion of classroom decor and what you surround your students with. We know that in the media, our students and our kids and our children are bombarded with this constant negative imagery of who they are and what they look like. And we need to decorate our doors, our classrooms, our walls. Everywhere they turn, there should be some sort of positive imagery of who they are and where they come from to counterbalance the negativity that they see on a regular basis. Again, remember, controlling what someone is exposed to, right, can impact the way they see and think and feel about themselves. So if you are omitting the positive images, then all they see is negative, and they start to see themselves as negative. We need to incorporate more positivity. And the last one I'll talk about is including student voice. And there are so many ways to do this. I'm just going to include a couple that I did when I was in the classroom. But there are many ways to do this. What I would do at the end of every unit and at the end of every semester, I would give a quick survey of to my kids about how they felt about what they just learned, how they felt about that unit. I would ask them questions like, what was your favorite part of this unit? What was your least favorite part? What could I have done differently? How did I treat you as a person, right? How can I improve? What did I do that you liked? And I would just compile that information, read it, and then look back at it and try to improve my practice, but also let them know that I was looking at it. So I would have these graphs and I would display these graphs in my classroom to let them know that I'm seeing what they are saying and I am making adjustments to my classroom in a necessary way. So I asked them about how they would grade me as a teacher. I asked them about their favorite topic. I asked them about their least favorite topic. And then I asked them to go a little bit deeper. And so I get the qualitative as well. I get the subjective as well. I get them to talk to me about what it is that I did good or bad or things that I could improve upon or all of these sorts of things. And so I actually get that words from my students and center that. And then I let them know that I'm reading it and that I let them know what changes I'm going to make so that they know their voice has power. Okay. And here's just a few others. It says, I want to be the best teacher I can be. So in what areas do I need to improve? And so some people, some students say, you're doing great, you're doing fine, keep rocking and rolling. And then others say, I could, as the last one here says, you need to focus less on telling people to do their work because it's wasting our class time, right? Students understand what's happening in the classroom. They get it. They see it. And they know what they want for their education. And we need to listen to them. So those are the very quick ways that you can decolonize your curriculum. There are 4 simple steps you can take. Read, incorporate that history that you've read about, decorate your classroom and infuse positive imagery, and then of course, infuse student voice. Here's all my contact information. My name is Joseph Edelin. My email is projectujima@gmail.com. My website, project-ujima.com. And then of course, you can follow me on social media, Project Ujima LLC. This has been great. I hope that you learned something. Please contact me if you have any questions, want resources, need any additional information. I'll be happy to help in any way I can. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference.